Well, hello, Stacy Murphy here with a video on growing media, soil, compost, mixes, amendments, which materials you should purchase. And oftentimes people use these terms interchangeably: growing media, soil, potting mix, seed starting mix. What does it all mean? That's what we're going to decipher in this video. And so you're going to know what you need and when you need it. And the second important thing is that sometimes you have to buy topsoil and you have to buy compost when you're just beginning, and that's okay. A lot of times we want to grow our own soil, we want to grow our own compost, and later you can do that. But when you're just getting started, there is no shame in going out and purchasing these things so you can get started right away. And this is one of the fastest ways to get started growing a vegetable garden. Okay, so first of all, let's talk about this terminology. What is growing medium? So growing medium is a catch-all phrase. It can mean many, many things. It can mean whatever you're growing your plants in. So the first medium that everybody thinks about is soil. And soil, the earth has been creating soil since the earth has been around, and soil is similar to topsoil. So topsoil is the top surface of the soil. It's the top couple inches of the soil crust around Earth. And what's in topsoil? Well, you'd be surprised, but 50% of good quality soil is 25% air, 25% water. That's for root structures to grow. Then you have these two other components. 45% are mineral particles and 5% organic matter. So let's talk about the mineral particles. What is that? Essentially, that is all of your nutrients. So inside mineral particles are things like calcium and manganese and phosphorus. Now, where do they come from? Essentially, where that mineral particles come from is the parent material or bedrock that the soil was formed from. So deep in the earth are all these large rocks, and they basically get broken up by root systems and by organisms, and they rise to the surface into this thin layer that's finely ground up. That's why we call it topsoil. It's at the top, and all of those nutrients are based on whatever that bedrock material is. So if you're in Taiwan, or if you're in the Philippines, or if you're in Alabama, your parent material is different, and therefore your nutrients are different. So the second thing to understand is the organic matter component. So that is where the terminology organic gardening comes from. That 5% is alive. It is organisms that are alive, it's root systems that are alive, and then it is also decaying matter. So it's anything that once was alive in the soil that's starting to decompose. And so when we're adding compost to soil, we're contributing to that 5%. Now notice, if we were to try to grow in all compost, it's not the ideal soil. So ideal soil, 5% organic matter. Now, sometimes we want to add amendments to our soil. Let's say we want to add some calcium, or we want to add some phosphorus. Then we want to figure out a way to add things like rock dust, which are very similar to adding bedrock back into our soil. So we'll talk about that in this video as well. So that's what soil is. That's one type of growing medium. Now there are other types of growing medium. Seed starting mixes and potting mixes are growing mediums. We grow plants in them, but they are not soil. So I'll talk to you later about what's in those materials, but just keep in mind they are all growing medium, but they are not soil. And then in this video, I'm not going to cover hydroponic, aquaponic, and aeroponic growing media, because essentially those are completely different systems. So that's not covered in this video. So let's talk about topsoil for a minute. Let's say you have a yard, you want to grow some food, and you either have compacted clay and you can't dig into it, so you have no soil, you want to go purchase some, or you have a concrete driveway and you want to add soil to create your planting beds. Whatever the case may be, one of the fastest ways to grow vegetables is to create raised garden beds, to fill them with soil and to start growing. And you're going to want to add 6 to 10 inches of topsoil, 10 inches if you want to go for all veggies. I would say that's the safer bet. And you want to create these sturdy boxes to hold the topsoil. In this image, we've used a thinner lumber, and it would basically fall apart. It would bend outwards because that soil would press against that wood, and it's a lot of weight. That wood will come apart. And so we've propped up the sides with these posts to keep the boxes together. So you want to make sure you create sturdy boxes if you want them to hold up for the long run. So what do you buy? So you go out to the store, and what you need is topsoil. You don't need bags of compost, you need bags of topsoil first. And so you want to take a look at where the topsoil was gathered. Generally, topsoil is something that they've taken from one area, they've bagged it up, and they're selling it. In this case, it's from the East Coast, I believe. So you just want to understand. You can also look up what parent material, what kind of bedrock is in that area of the world, just so you have an understanding of the nutrients. But here's the good news. When you're growing a garden bed and you want to create these raised beds, you're going to fill it with 10 inches of topsoil, and then you're going to top it off with 2 inches of compost. And I'll show you one other thing to add, and you're going to have good quality growing, even though this might not have all the nutrients you need up front. So you're going to add in some of those nutrients. You can go as far as to test the soil. There are places where you can test soil, usually colleges, but for the most part, all you need to do is buy the topsoil, and I'll show you what else you need to buy, and you can get some really thriving vegetable gardens very, very quickly. All right, and you'll notice it says product is regionally formulated from organic and inorganic materials, including one or more of the following: peat, forest, compost, ash, sand, or native topsoil. So they can't guarantee what's in the bag because they probably just dug it up and threw it in the bag. So there's a little bit of trust involved. Okay, so the next thing is you need some compost, and you want to try to find some good quality compost if you can. And my recommendation is, if you can buy organic compost, it's always a little bit better than something that's not certified organic. Now, both of these bags, they look like good bags of compost. The one on the right, it's all green. It says really good compost. The one on the left, though, is a little better. And the reason why I say that is it actually has a listing that says OMRI listed. That is the official organic stamp. That means that these people have passed the organic standards. So it'll be a little bit more expensive, but you'll have a little bit more peace of mind. I would recommend it if you can afford it. That's not to say that the other version is not good. It's hard to tell. So when you look at the back of the bag, this particular bag that says it's really good compost says in the ingredients that it was formulated in Maryland from forest products compost, yard waste compost, manure compost, mushroom compost, food waste compost. Those all sound like really great things. So it might truly be a really good bag of compost. It says it's mulch and soil compost certified. That doesn't mean a whole lot, unfortunately, but this might still be a good bag of compost. This bag is a green bag of compost, very similar to the other one, but it has that OMRI listing at the bottom, you'll notice. So go ahead and see what you can find in your area. If you can buy organic, buy it, I would recommend. But if not, you're still going to get a good bag of compost. Okay, next up are nutrients and amendments. So the only real nutrient amendment that I recommend adding, well, I have two, other than compost. And this is going to get you started really well with vegetables. The first one is pure organic worm castings. Now, notice this does not say vermicompost. The difference between worm castings and vermicompost: worm castings are pure worm poop. It's just worm poop. When it says vermicompost, it has other things mixed in there that the worms have decomposed. It's a little bit less concentrated. So if you can buy worm castings, it might be a little bit more expensive, but it's also more concentrated. You don't need very much of it. Notice, you can see the OMRI listing on this. And this particular bag says that it was, it's just worm castings digested from their special worm feed, and they don't list what their special worm feed is, unfortunately. But you don't need a whole lot of this. So, this is what it looks like. It basically looks like little tiny poop from worms. And vermicompost can work if that's all you can find. So the reason why I recommend using this material is that plants that use 10% of worm castings or vermicompost in the planting bed, up to 10%, you get a benefit of less disease and less pests. And this has been proven out in different farm testings. And so I highly recommend, if you can get your hands on some, it's really great to add to your planting bed. And the only amendment that I really recommend adding, rock dust. There are a couple on the market. There's another one called azomite. This one is a volcanic rock dust. Azomite is one that's volcanic and also sea creatures all mixed in together. And so essentially what this is when you think about volcanic rock dust, this is all the minerals of the earth that have been thrown up out of a volcano and dried up. And so you're getting all the basic nutrients within the earth. And this is, ground up into this fine dust. And so here you can see what that looks like. You really don't need a whole lot of this. The instructions are on the bag, and there's another video that I have that shows how I mix all this together in my bag. You can go to the store and get organic manures. I don't recommend them as when you get started with vegetables. I think that you can do much better with an all-purpose compost. Sometimes with the animal manures, they are too extreme for the vegetables. They are not slow release formulas, they're high release formulas, and they can burn your plants. They can upset the balance of the biology of your soil. So I don't necessarily recommend them. If you use them very sparingly and try to make sure that they are composted. So this one does not say composted chicken manure, it just says chicken manure. I would recommend if you're going to use any manure, make sure it's composted. All right, so let's talk a little bit about containers because we're going to talk about potting mix. So with containers, you're going to want to use whatever you have available. You can, literally anything you have available, and you can grow vertical, and you can grab pallets, you can grow in these plastic towers, you can grow horizontal. This is a container garden because it's a horizontal garden hanging off of a balcony and it's inside of a box. That is a container. That is not in the ground. So that's a container garden. You can also choose a bunch of different buckets of all different sizes and grow horizontal that way. And you can grow in small 6-inch diameters, and you can grow tiny greens this way. You can grow, when you're thinking about these 6-inch diameters, you're thinking of things that are small that get harvested quickly. Then when you have 8-inch diameter containers, you can go upward. You can plant your kale and your collards, your peppers, tomatoes, and you can also plant some herbs underneath those plants as well. When you go up to 12-inch diameter containers, you can grow fruit trees, potatoes, and corn, or you could also grow a series of different vegetables together. And just remember that there are many different types of container materials, and if you can grow in some of these terracotta containers, they're really nice because they're a little bit porous, and they're also nice because they're not black. They don't get really hot in hot environments, so they don't. Some of the other small plastic ones heat up really fast and you lose moisture really fast. So any containers will work. And once a season, you're going to refresh your compost and your potting mix within these containers. So what is potting mix? When you're going to grow in a container, anything you just looked at, whether it's a pallet or a bucket or a box, a wooden box hanging off your deck, you're going to use potting mix. And the reason you're going to use potting mix is that it's more lightweight and it's going to hold moisture better because a lot of containers, they lose their moisture quickly. So this is why you rely on potting mixes versus soil. Soil can get really densely packed and it just doesn't work. So again, when you're looking for potting mix, look at the terminology here. This is really messed up. This says planting mix, and it's hard to tell whether it's a potting mix or a compost or what is this, right? So you have to kind of look at the ingredients. In this case, it says OMRI listed, so that's a good sign. When I look at the back and I look at the box or the label, it says, we recommend using this with 5-gallon containers or larger. So they're thinking about this as a potting mix. And look at these ingredients. These are awesome natural ingredients. Fir bark, sawdust, composted green waste, peat moss, redwood sawdust, alfalfa meal, fishbone meal, bone meal. Notice when you have things that are from the ocean and things that are from the earth, and you have that mixture, that's a really good biology because you get the best of both worlds. So you have some kelp meal in there. You have some mycorrhizae, which are mushrooms. So you've got a little bit of everything. And then they add some other ingredients as well. Now, so this I would call a potting mix because it's definitely not topsoil and it's definitely not compost. I would call this a potting mix. You could also use this, I'll show you. Seed starting mixes have very similar ingredients oftentimes, so you could also use it as a seed starting mix if you wanted to buy one bag and do two different things at once. And you can see all the mycorrhizae that are in this. They list all the different fungal elements. Mycorrhizae are really good for root growth, so that's a good sign. Now, all-purpose potting soil. Look at this. It doesn't say potting mix, it says potting soil. Super confusing. It's not soil, it's potting mix. So take a look at the ingredients. Very similar to the previous bag. Same, might be same manufacturer. So this is OMRI listed. It has pretty much all the same ingredients as that last bag had. So again, this is another good deal with that OMRI listing. And up front, or up close and personal, you can see some of those same ingredients. Okay, so there are other brands of potting mixes, right? There is standard brands, things like Miracle Grow that show up everywhere. Now, I would be a little weary of things that don't have the organic label on them, and here's why. When I look down the ingredient list on this potting mix, what I find is instead of seeing all those organic materials like fir bark and mushroom, mycorrhizae and kelp meal and all of those things that are wonderful about the earth, what I see instead is derived from ammonium nitrate, ammonium phosphate, calcium phosphate, and potassium sulfate. Those are all chemicals. So the fertilizer in this is coming from chemicals versus coming from products or from earth products. And so I would opt not to go this way personally. So just something to be aware of when you start to see those chemical ingredients. It's not going to be as easy to grow food long term. It might work short term because it's going to be like a oomph boost to your plants potentially, but in the long run, there's nothing there for your plants. So I would stick to anything that's natural. Now, Miracle Grow now has what they call an organic potting mix, and it's just a little bit more expensive than their other potting mix, and it's not as expensive as other organic potting mixes on the mix or on the shelf. But they definitely are not listed OMRI. But when you look at the ingredients, it does all come from natural ingredients. So it's up to you whether you want to decide to trust those because you're seeing natural ingredients there versus something that is OMRI tested. So that's up to you to decide. So what about seed starting mix? Okay, well first we have our trays. And when you're purchasing trays, I would recommend not purchasing trays. I would recommend grabbing trays for free. Grab anything out there. You can grab trays that have holes in the bottom and cover them with newspaper. I show you that in another video. You can grab trays that used to have other plants in them at the store, and sometimes what I'll do is I'll stuff these full with plants and I end up double stacking or triple stacking the trays and taking them with me so that I have free trays. And the important thing here is that you want to sterilize your trays when you're just getting started because your tray can have bacteria, it can lend to disease in your baby plants. So you want to sterilize your trays. You're going to create a 1 to 10 bleach to water solution. You're going to soak your trays in that bleach solution for 20 minutes. You're going to rinse it clean of all the bleach solution and you're going to dry that tray thoroughly before you use it. So you might have to sit it out in the sun to dry it, just completely dry. And just a quick note, a 1 to 10 vinegar solution is 97% effective against most diseases without the chemical of using bleach, if that's of concern to you. And when I say 1 to 10 solution, 1 part bleach to 10 parts water, or 1 part vinegar to 10 parts water. All right, so your seed starting mix, what do you buy? I was out at the store and I found this one grow mix, but I couldn't find any that were organic, but I just thought I would share it with you. And this particular one is essentially 2 ingredients. It's essentially peat moss and perlite, and then they also have some lime as a pH adjuster and a wetting agent. So you can, it also has the mycorrhizae, because the mycorrhizae, which is the fungal growth, those are things that are great for starting seeds because they contribute to root growth. So oftentimes you'll see seed starting mixes have mycorrhizae in them. That's a good sign. So this one just has 2 ingredients, but oftentimes the seed starting mixes look much more like those bags of potting mix where they actually have some of the other ingredients. They have compost in them and kelp meal and some of those other ingredients. So I would recommend, if you can't find one that you like, you can always make one yourself. And here are the ingredients for homemade mixtures. This is for potting mixes or for seed starting mixes. And what I find is that you can really use them fairly interchangeably when you're just getting started. Just know that peat moss is really good for root growth, and so is the mycorrhizae, and so is perlite, because it gives a lot of airspace. So whenever you're using a seed starting mix, those are some ingredients that are going to be in there. So a growing media for seed starting or potting mix, you can create your own recipe, and you can go out and buy the main ingredients. And what you want is something that is fine and uniform. You want it free of insects, disease, and organisms, free of weed seeds. And so that's going to ensure that your plants get off to a really healthy start. And you want to make sure that it takes up water. And I show you how to do that in a video when we're talking about seed starting. So with a homemade mix, what I would recommend is, if you have compost on hand that you've made, that's great, or if you need to buy it. So 4 parts compost, 1 part perlite, 1 part vermiculite, 2 parts coconut coir or peat moss. And the reason why I say coconut coir or peat moss, it may be available, differently available wherever you are. They serve the same function. They're really good for root growth, but in some cases, the coconut coir is not available. If you have both available, you might want to think about coconut coir over peat moss. Peat moss is not known as the most sustainable garden ingredient, so if you can use less of it, that's always a good thing. So let's look at what those are. So peat moss, it comes in big bags. This one has an OMRI listing on it. Generally what this is, it's harvested right out of the ground and put into these bags. It's lightweight, it's kind of brown, it's kind of fibrous, and it's really good, again, for that root growth. Coconut coir, this bag comes, it says Black Magic, it's coconut coir, and it also has, this one also has perlite in it, so it's very similar to that previous seed starting mix where it's just those 2 ingredients. And coconut coir looks very similar to peat moss. It's brown, it's lightweight, and it's very fibrous, all right? So those ingredients, use one or the other. And then your perlite and your vermiculite, the perlite is the white, it's an expanded rock, it's kind of exploded. Similarly, vermiculite is an expanded rock as well. And what are these things? Well, essentially perlite is a volcanic rock that's rich in silicon, and basically as it's expanded, it holds air and water, and so this porosity allows excess water to drain really easily. And so if you're worried about soil aeration and drainage, you want perlite. But if you want to retain moisture, let's say you're in a hot desert climate, you want more vermiculite. And so vermiculite is this aluminum, iron, magnesium silicate. It can soak up to 3 or 4 times its volume in water. It also attracts certain nutrients as well. So again, that homemade recipe, if you're in a desert area, you could use 2 parts vermiculite instead of 1 part perlite, 1 part vermiculite. If you're in an area where you need the pots, it's very rainy, let's say, and very waterlogged, you're, in the northeast and it's going to be springtime, you might use more perlite because you know that it can hold water, but it can also drain water. So those are the different materials, and I hope that helps you understand what you need to buy and what you use each one of these materials for.